JJ Meets World is brought to you by Goof Roof. Noel Scotch Anderson is a professional cartoonist and general creative person. If you, your company, or publication are looking for some great artwork, let Scotch take a doodle at it. Scotch was the artist who wrote and performed our JJ Meets World theme song, soon to be available as a ringtone. He's a man of many talents and will gladly sell out for you the same way he sold out for us. Logo design, custom caricatures, or full comic books are just an email away. Find Scotch's work and contact information at www.goofroof.com.
1, 2, 3, 4. J.J. Gordon, sort of like that Indiana Jones, in that he's always sniffing out his next adventure. Yes, he is. He's always interviewing guests so he can have them on his show and they can talk about pop culture, arts, and leisure. J.J. has his flag unfurled and he likes his french fries curled, and he's fun and then he twirled as he goes to meet the world. He will march into the rain even if his ankle sprained. Take a peek inside his brain. This podcast is called J.J. Meets World.
We live in a world plagued by free t-shirts. Constantly am I given a free t-shirt promoting this, that, or the other thing, and I don't need them. They just clutter up my closet, and I am a person who wears a tall size. I've got an enormous torso. It's ridiculous. I've got these skinny little legs, and then I've got a long torso, so I need a tall size shirt. Well, when you mass produce shirts for a 5K or a spaghetti feed, you never make them in tall sizes. And so they're like, oh, do you want like a 3XL instead? And I'm like, no, I do not, because I'm not going to tie it in a little ball at the end of it like I'm a lifeguard. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
little
absolutely.
thing?
Yeah.
If you had to think about the t-shirts that are in your closet right now, how many of them are free promotional t-shirts that you got?
Most of them are ones that work gave me.
So would you consider those promotional t-shirts? I see the t-shirt you're wearing right now promotes your work.
I guess so, yeah. So sure, technically it would be like 3/4 of the t-shirts in my closet right now.
Are t-shirts a good way of marketing and advertising your product, do you think?
Well, I don't know if I've ever met someone who turned down a free t-shirt.
Truth.
Right? Mm-hmm. And so it's not, the trick is not getting them to take it. The trick is, would they actually wear it?
I take them and go, oh, this will be a good paint shirt. Like
sure.
If I'm going to paint something.
Sure, yeah. But I don't know. I mean, like, it just depends on the quality of the shirt.
I had a bunch of t-shirts from my youth that I turned into a quilt. I didn't. I chose them, and then somebody who has superior sewing and quilting skills turned them into a quilt for me that I like. I look at it fondly. It's got some of my, like, I was in a high school improv troupe, and we all had shirts that had funny little quips on the back.
Yeah. Don Quixote's.
Yep, that's the name of the troupe, Don Quixote's. Shout out to Fargo South High. Whoop, whoop.
We'll probably have to do an episode based on Don Quixote's at some point.
Because
that organization is it's old now. It's been around for a very long time, and it's incredibly popular.
They just celebrated their 20th
Wow.
year. It is the
Wow,
longest
that's
running.
amazing.
Yeah, it's the longest running improv troupe in North Dakota.
Wow, that's fantastic. That is
Isn't
so
that neat?
good.
It's also a great training ground. You know, you take a look at groups like Second City and UCB, and those are training grounds for the next comedians you see on Saturday Night Live and in movies. But Don Quixote's is a training ground for professional improv troupes like the Linebenders, who do not give out promotional t-shirts. You can purchase them, so you really have to want... I think if someone has to buy something, it's got more weight than if you give it to them for free. For example, our JJ Meets World t-shirts, which are now available, can be purchased, or you can be a guest on the show and we'll give you one.
I see. So you're saying there's actually more value to someone who doesn't get to come on the show and just buys one than the one who comes on the show and then we give them to them.
Yeah. In fact, I thought about at one point making the back of the shirt say guest or previous guest.
Oh.
So that people could identify. I assume we're going to be going to the podcast conventions. And so we're going to want to be able to identify our previous guests versus people who are just fans.
You know me, JJ. If there's anything I love, it's conventions.
You do. You really love manning a table or a booth and explaining, having that like elevator pitch for why people should be listening to our podcast.
Hey, can we network? I'll give you my business card. You give me my business card. And yeah, maybe we can somehow do something for each other, which will never, ever happen.
Here's what I think people miss when doing something like that. Why would we want to sit behind the booth of our podcast? Because we're recording it. We already know we like it, but we're really close to it. Mm-hmm. We should populate our booth with the fans of the podcast.
Sure.
And those should be the people who are selling it to other folks because they found it on the internet, they enjoy it, they listen to it twice a week.
But you know what I'd like to see would be a JJ Meets World booth at a convention that is not a podcast convention.
Oh, like a culinary outfit?
Yeah, or like when the circus comes to town. Can we set up a booth of our podcast at the circus? We'd much rather do that than do it at a podcast convention.
That's actually a pretty decent idea. If we put like a little like promo booth somewhere.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, we'll put it in the hopper.
The hop. Oh yeah, I see what you're saying.
See what we're saying?
Yeah. At first I was like the hopper, like from Stranger Things, but that's not what you meant. Or the Hopper from the Muppet movie. That's not what you meant. Today we have a great guest who probably actually could help us with this convention idea and sticking out better than just your average Joe, because he creates art. He creates, and I'm not talking about he takes some watercolor and does a beautiful painting, but he creates art experience. You've already had a chance to meet Mike Ressl because he was on our episode with Christina Johnson talking about Burning Man. He's a part of the setup, teardown, and running of Burning Man. He's the regional representative, I think is what you say?
Yep.
So if you've got questions and you're in the upper Midwest, specifically the Fargo, Moorhead, Dilworth, Hillsboro, Grafton even area, and you've got questions about Burning Man, Mike Ressl is the guy to talk to. But we get to really delve into some creative things. He has a direct link to one of my favorite documentaries of all time, The Institute, that I'm very excited for people to hear. In fact, you can hear the giddiness in my voice when we talk to him in this episode.
Yeah. I'm really excited to have Ressl on this podcast. Ressl has been one of my best friends for years. We met in middle school, and we've been super tight ever since. And he is one of, I think, the smartest and most talented people that I know. But we have a lot of strange shared history, too, that we kind of go over in the podcast a little bit.
Yeah, in fact, I there's a part where I force you to talk about something you don't want to talk about.
Basically, if you went to high school with me, you should listen.
Yeah.
JJ Meets World.
All right. Welcome back to the studio, Mike Ressl. We're going to talk a little bit about art today. Cool. And let's start with this. What's the art that gets you going? What do you like?
Maybe it's like some anime girls and things with explosions. Anything that I would never have expected could possibly be there or has existed before.
So like pop-up books.
Yeah.
You don't expect it, and then you pull a tab, and it's like, oh, there's a goat.
Or like if there's a company that could just make me Michael Douglas in the game.
Oh, okay.
I would spend a shameless amount of money to make that happen.
So right away I'm going to veer us off. Have you seen the documentary The Institute?
Yes.
Okay. So The Institute, for you guys who've never heard of it, is one of the most mind-blowing, weird things that I have ever seen. And I went into it with no prior knowledge. Someone was just like, you need to watch this. And long story short, it's a piece about somebody who sees advertising and they take a little tab off of a piece of paper, and then they get involved in this weird, you don't know if it's real, if it's fake, if it's performance art. I highly recommend it. When you watched it, what was your perspective on the Institute?
So I had a pretty kind of different perspective because my friend was in it.
What?
So he was the gentleman that was blacked out.
Really?
Right. So they use a sort of this kind of and almost antagonist, I think, for the arc that exists, right?
What? That's awesome.
And he wasn't. I didn't like how they portrayed some aspects of it, and having an understanding kind of how some of the stuff that went on. I thought it was it did a very good job at explaining kind of what it was and what it entailed. And even me, because I don't live in San Francisco, the parts that I experienced of it were limited to the things that I could make it to. But so my first experience of it was getting together with my friend, and he said, "Hey, there's this thing called the Jejun Institute. Do you want to go check it out?" And I was like, "Of course, we're both into this kind of weird shit." And they had been putting flyers up around town, and then they kind of had loosely these people that had, my friend had found it through a Craigslist ad. And I don't remember specifically what it was. A Center for Socio Reengineering. So it's this sort of like parapsychological self-development aspect that spoke to some higher aspect of the mind or humanity, whatever. It's like Dianetics without the L. Ron Hubbard. So loosely. Anyway, so he takes me to this building right next to Chinatown. It's actually in the financial district in San Francisco. And I thought this is cool. Like, I'd never been to that part of San Francisco. I never had any excuse to go there. You go in the building. It's a giant building, and you have to get checked in at the security desk, and then you go way up, 20 stories, and there's a clerk who gives you a key. And the key has this little map on it and this little note that tells you which door to go in and what door the key goes to. And he's coming with me, and then I before that we stopped, and he bought some flowers, and I was like, "What are those for?" He's like, "Oh, it's for the thing we're doing." I was like, because he had already done it. Like, well, what's that for? And so we get in the room, and when you open the door, this automated voice starts speaking. And it tells you to sit in this chair, and it's like this weird 70s lounger, and there's a TV in front of it. And the room is furnished with the most eccentric, interesting artifacts and photos and books. And I remember just taking pictures of the bookshelf, like, I'm going to read these later, because I had never heard half of that shit. And this video starts playing, and it's this sort of history of the Institute, and explains what it is. And then there's a gentleman who founded the Institute, Octavio Coleman, and he gives this very, it's almost poetic presentation of who he is and what the Institute is and what it can provide. And not in terms of an exchange, like you're gonna give me money and sign your life away in a billion-year contract, but that there's this underlying potential and wisdom that they've harnessed for the good of, or the betterment of, each other and humanity. This is very, it was very poetic. There was this poetic aspect to it. And then you were instructed not to look in the box next to you and not follow the instructions. I remember thinking, well, okay, that obviously means I need to follow the instructions. So but I remember looking at it in the elevator, and the first thing it tells you to do is disregard the security desk, go through the fire door that says "Do not open." I remember looking at my friend like, is this shit for real? And it had all this elaborate instructions on the card. He's like, well, and he wanted me to make my own decision. I was like, well, I don't know if I can do this. He's like, well, then we're done here. And I was like, okay, that was a bad move. Should not have said that. And so I go through this door, and I make sure they're not looking at me when I go through it. And there's no alarm. I'm like, okay. And it's just a normal fire exit. Like, it's an unfurnished concrete corridor. And you go out and you realize there's something hidden in the wall, and it's like this symbol, and it references something on the card. And this is just like one step in like 30 interactions throughout the day as we follow the card, and this sort of story emerges where there's this woman who's missing, and that was who the flower was for. And it's like this tribute or homage to her missing. But there's also this organization that's, it's purporting these impossible devices and technology, and you're following their instructions and doing this thing. And at the end of it, like, you interact with all these things that are physically embedded in public space, and then, like, you go buy a postcard that's only you would know to buy, and you stand at a special place and hold it, and it frames the buildings in a certain way that teaches you something about the architecture. And this thing just it goes on. And you eventually, that was just the first act. And my friend, oddly enough, was one of the first people to respond to the ad and could be a part of it. And he kind of became a player in this whole thing that they were doing. And it was kind of one of the reasons he was in the film. And I I participated in a few of the acts. Like I did the one in Mission Park where you could go to certain businesses and rent a boombox. Rent like you would just give them your ID, so it's free. So the other thing about this is none of this ever costs any money, and it was entirely automated. You get a boombox, and there was a pirate radio station coming straight out of Mission Park. I don't know where it's based out of, and they had the voice actor from like one of the best video games in the world, Half-Life, be this character scientist talking about the evils of the Jejun Institute and this other organization that was, fighting against them. And then you were looking all around this park for all of these other things that were, again, hidden in public space and just completely strange, just like unlike anything I had ever experienced.
That is, so when I watched The Institute, I thought to myself, I would never have followed this as far as they follow it. At one point, I would have gotten weirded out. I would have thought I'm being set up to be a fool here. And so it amazes me. And that's who I am, right? That's my vanilla life that I lead. That's the person who would never in a million years try on pants if I wasn't wearing underwear, So that is fascinating. So to me, that was one of the things that I've interacted with recently where I thought, man, art is so much more than just something hanging on a wall. It can be these weird puzzles that people put together. It can be virtual. You like VR stuff, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, absolutely.
And so, like, do you feel that that's art or technology, or where's there a line between those two things?
So it's kind of there's actually there's a pretty discrete philosophy behind the Institute that so Jeff Hull, it's kind of the guy that funded this. So you understand, it costs a lot of money to make a lot of the stuff that they did, and he even tried to do a whole nother thing after that was even more ambitious that I interacted with as well. But so there's this idea that we don't really utilize civic space in the arts in the way that we could, and there's this huge potential. So he gives this great 15-minute presentation on civic space where he just shows you a map of a city, and he uses San Francisco and downtown, and he says, okay, these are all the places that are used for transport. These are the places where all people do is they are going to and from their jobs or to and from shopping centers. These are all the places where people live. Now, where are the communal civic spaces? And there's parks, and he shows just the percentage wise these spaces that we acknowledge have an aspect of play. He uses this word a lot. Play, this mindset where you can imagine and explore your creativity and these other things can happen there. Most of the time we go to a park, it's just a bunch of kids and people are blowing giant bubbles or walking on tightropes. But they are technically these spaces with this sort of potential. So what these things are doing, at least what he's created and other people I think are trying to leverage. What interests me about it is that you can take a piece of art and you can lay this thing over it where a person can become part of the story and they can interact with something in these other spaces that aren't parks where it transforms their experience of the space in a way and leverages what's already there, whether it's this like amazing pizza shop or this hole in the wall that no one else would know about except for you, or they have this weird thing that you can interact with on the wall that you go in the Hodo and there's a secret cupboard in the art piece. No one would happen upon that, and so you connect things. You try to connect things through a narrative or an experience and tie them together in a way that people can actually play with them. And that's pretty difficult to do. That's a pretty broad generalization of what I get from what he tried to do and what that was like. There's all sorts of ways to do that. Our art definitely can be more than what's on a wall, and it doesn't have to be trapped within the frame of these boundaries. And you don't need to stand against a two-dimensional surface talking to other people about what they're seeing, and the artist is somewhere else. There can be actors involved. Like it can exist outside all these other things. So I guess so. For me, it was this sort of this amazing example of what was possible, and it completely changed my perception of what I wanted to see more of. And I immediately was like, how do we make more of this? How do you do this? And you know, a lot of things I experienced at Burning Man are like that. Virtual reality is able to do that. I think so too, just because you have agency over a space, a digital space, that you can make anything you want, and you can immediately lay a character or an experience over something or someone that can kind of change that perspective. But I think the Institute's such a perfect example, because you're taking a city like San Francisco, and I experienced parts of that city that I would have never have otherwise known existed, and were magical in a completely different way. Were magical just in their own right. It just blew my mind. So there are still people that are trying to do that, and it's interesting because their second version of that sort of ran into all the like functional and commercial pitfalls and setbacks that occur when you try to scale something like that.
Mm-hmm. I'm interested in when someone creates a piece of art and it's consumed in a way that they did not assume it was going to be consumed. Here's an example. The guy who designed the Cloud Gate in Chicago. Have you ever heard of the Cloud Gate? No. Hardly anyone has ever heard of the Cloud Gate, but everyone knows of the Bean in Chicago, which is a giant metal reflective bean in Millennium Park. Well, it's called the Cloud Gate, and it's meant to kind of like be a reflective piece where you see the sky and you see all these things put together. But that is the number one place to take a selfie in Chicago right now. People stand and take a picture of their own reflection looking back, and it's become so popular that people have started just thinking like, oh, I've been there, and then they share the pictures back and forth with like, look what I did with this. Well, when you go back and you read all these things from the artist who originally created that design, that wasn't a part of his thought process. Was like, oh, people are going to stand in front of this and take a picture, and their memory is going to be this weird version of themselves that they're looking back and forth at. It was supposed to be this way to bring, the sky down and have this neat reflective area. And so that changes it. And just a few yards down from that, you've got those two giant glass pillars where they project people's faces and they look at each other. Have you seen these? They're right across the street from the Art Institute of Chicago, which I think is interesting because that's what people would consider traditional art, sculpture, paintings, things as such. But so it's these two giant columns that have projection equipment inside of them, and they are giant faces that look each other, real close-ups of faces, and it's not an image or like a photo of it. It's video content. So like the images blink and stuff like that. Every now and then they purse their lips, and there's a fountain aspect, and like water comes shooting out. So it looks like they're spitting water. Well, during the summer months, this is where people take their kids to come like play in a fountain. And so it's constantly full of families and kids with their pants like rolled up, to their knees, and they're kind of dancing around in this. And if you go back and look at the original idea for, the original like mock-up concepts and like what the city of Chicago was thinking for Millennium Park, it doesn't show kids playing in the water. It shows a lot of kids with their parents just kind of looking at it and appreciating the look of it. And so I love when something is created and the person taking that in gets to change the way it's consumed or the way it's felt, because that's what it should be, don't you think? Like art should be what you make of it.
Yeah, I think it's the challenges in making that possible are, like in a civic space, right? There's a lot of liability considerations. So like I think more often than not, you have people standing in line to get a ticket for something, and they sign a liability form, and then they're able to pick up the thing, and if it harms them or they harm themselves with it, it's nobody's fault, but they're, and I think that's what usually takes like the amount of resources then that to be put in that process to insulate everyone from the risk that's involved, like it just immediately sucks all the energy out of what's happening.
This conversation is making me think of that scene from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, where they go to the art museum and
The Art Institute of Chicago.
What's the best friend's name?
Cameron.
Cameron finds that painting of the park, and he is just all he does is he just stands and stares at it because I believe there's a picture of a little kid whose face looks like he might be screaming or crying, and he's just transfixed with this piece of art. And he's not a person who would consider himself, I think, in character, an appreciator of art. But suddenly he's walking past this painting and he stops, and it has a severely emotional effect on him. He goes into a catatonic state shortly thereafter because of the art. Mike, is that not that art has ever made you catatonic, I'm necessarily suggesting, but have you ever had an experience with a piece of art that you didn't anticipate but was transformative or transcendental?
It's a big question. I have to think about it for a bit. It's I think for me it's more impactful when it's not something I expect on more than an initial scale. So like it's never happened to me in a museum because I usually go there with the mindset that I'm prepared. Like my expectations are primed to experience art. But I guess I also don't consider myself someone that like I didn't go to school for art. I don't even really talk about art a whole lot. You know, this would be the most I delve down a rabbit hole of what some of that stuff means or try to categorize some of the experiences I've had. So when I'm at Burning Man, for example, you know, I'm going out into the city and stuff, I guess we try to embody a different mindset in that we have all of these things that we can collect together actively. You know, like there was an art piece one year that was a giant xenomorph. This was a giant alien. And it kind of looked like a Trojan horse almost. They blew it up eventually. But like you could crawl inside. It was very big, and there were giant xenomorph eggs. And I remember sneaking in, and they weren't finished. Like they hadn't opened it up. But like I talked to the artist, they're like, "Yeah, it's fine. You can go in there." And they were all blacklit. And I took one. I took it out of the art, and I brought it to my friend. And I started pretending that we were married and that it was our baby. And I was so angry that he was neglecting our child and how it was his turn to take it, you know, and we're not fucked up at this point, but he's like, "Where the fuck did you get that egg? And why are you treating me like I'm your partner?" And his girlfriend's standing right there. And it's like this picturesque, like alien pod that we're passing between each other, and people are like, "What are those guys doing?" And like, "Where did that egg come from?" And my friends had no idea they were even in the thing because you had to crawl like underneath the belly of the monster kind of to get in and like harvest the eggs, right?
Harvest, excellent word.
Right. Because I really want to pet xenomorph. I think it's kind of like an example. Like it's hard for me to think of individual instances. I had some doing stuff with the June Institute and some of the other stuff they did later that was atypical of that, but it still feels like I had expectations attached to it. So like once I knew, oh, okay, there are people sort of puppet mastering this experience. You know, they're putting an intentionality. Like, this isn't real. Like I'm comfortable giving some of my agency or suspending my disbelief a little bit, but I think it's difficult. I think to like truly access that, you have to take a person by surprise. I'd say the only other, maybe one of the more recent, and still this, not necessarily a good example, but like I did Sleep No More when I was in New York. So this is it's like a non-standard theatrical performance where there's 4 stories of this building that they've converted into the stage for a non-vocal performance of Macbeth. And they're all performers, they go through it 3 times. So because you can't be in every part of the building at once, and you're getting it pieced together. And I had no familiarity with Macbeth, but I kind of pieced together where certain scenes were happening. And there were these instances where if you were standing in the right spot and you were paying attention, some of the actors or actresses would look at you and tell you to follow them. And I would watch people disappear into these rooms. I was like, where the fuck are they going? What are they doing? Why did they get to go? And we all had to wear masks to denote that we were part of the audience and stuff like that. I was realized there's more to this. Like, how do I get in there? And I started mapping out where some of them were getting asked, and they would take you. They would take you, and they would talk to you, and there would be instances where you'd have conversations, and they would ask you to do things. And there was this whole other level to their performance and their characters that they were doing to different people. And I guess so. It kind of felt like an experience of that, but at the same time, I paid to be a part of that, and I actually would have been kind of frustrated and pissed if I hadn't at least gotten one opportunity to figure out what was going on, because you weren't supposed to talk to the people, even the strangers that you were seeing it with, because it was disruptive to the performance, and you don't want to get in their way and stuff like that. So you just kind of get lucky or know what you were doing, I guess. And it kind of happened for me. I don't know if those are really good examples, but
great examples
come to mind.
And you pulled it into the realm of theater. I think if I was ever going to think of something that like moved me as an art piece, I've seen some pieces of theater which I consider art, that have just utterly brought me to a point of questioning everything I thought about a certain subject, or felt so real to me that you have to think, are there cameras following me around somewhere? It's like they took a chunk of my life and put it onto the stage. I remember seeing a play called Amber Waves that's set in Iowa, and you follow a family who are living through a drought on their farm, and the son is getting ready to go to college, but the dad says, you can't go to college. I need help around here that I don't have to pay. You need to help me. We're the fourth generation on this farm. And it's the rural mentality of the area I grew up in that made me connect to these. But there is a scene near the end where the father and son just have it out in this field where the bank is getting ready to take away, and they fight, and the son runs away, and the dad just falls to his knees, and he starts to pray, and he's saying, this is not for me, it's for my family, please, 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 please. And he's gotten to a point of where he says, I am no longer like in control of my destiny. And so he's looking for a higher power. He's looking for anything to help. And it started to rain on stage, and I had never seen rain on stage before. And when it starts to rain, he just is on his knees, and he just looks up and just gets soaking wet in this rain. And it's like, it's sort of purifying him, and the rain, or his emotions all coming out. I was amazed. And I remember leaving the theater being like, okay, first, number one, how the hell did they do that? Because 2 seconds later it changes, and there's no water anywhere on stage. It was amazing to me. And it wasn't some kind of weird lighting effect where they had silver streamers hanging and they caught it with light. It wasn't like Waiting for Guffman, like the rain that they make in that. It was real water coming down, and you could smell it in the air. Oh, it was awesome. It was amazing.
One time, I also have an experience. I went to a strip club. Mm-hmm. And there was a shorter woman playing a character called Minnie Gaga. It's fantastic.
So it's interesting that you bring that up, because I would like to talk to both of you about art, and when something is just something fun that you do versus something you're creating, like that's meant to be art. So you guys both, when you were in high school, made a movie called Ressl X. It was a labor of love.
Ah, damn it.
Yep. It's a labor.
Tucker, yeah.
I know. I was so excited.
He gets all the credit.
I was so excited when I was like,
that's
both of you are going to be in the same room so we can talk about this a little bit.
My plan to do this podcast today totally backfired. Just completely backfired.
The last thing Tucker wants to revisit.
But so first of all, I want to compliment the fact that you actually made it. And you screened it for people. I know a lot of folks out there who say, wouldn't it be neat if we did this? Mm-hmm. Wouldn't it be cool if we, made a movie that did this? I know even from the day that you first screened it, Tucker, you were you were done with it. You had wanted, like, the birth was over and you had wanted nothing to do with your child.
That was a pretty dark day.
Yeah.
That was a pretty dark day.
But a lot of people packed a theater to watch it.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean,
about 200 people. Yeah.
I mean, I was high out of my gourd, but I had everything that I
most of the cast showed up stoned. I was not.
We were so nervous because we hadn't seen it. Hadn't seen even a majority cut of what was about to be presented on film, and I've been making dick jokes and frothing out of my mouth for a year. I thought, what have I gotten
almost
into?
2 years.
Right, like
Almost 2 years.
I had like these like women like, hey, come over here, come talk to us. You know, we're going to see you star in this movie, and I was like, yeah, I'm not. Like, I do not want to be known. I don't know what's about to happen. Like,
Nothing can inform your art or the vocation you want to take up more than massive failure and absolute abject embarrassment. You know, it was the thing that I take away from Ressl, which was Ressl and I graduated from high school together. Well, 02 for you, 03 for me. So we made this movie in high school, and it's really bad because we were in high school, and I had no idea what I was doing. I thought I did because I'd taken some video production classes. I'd seen a movie that had been made by teenagers previously to us called Embers by Troy Parkinson, Tim Sharp, who a lot of people know is on TV and has had a lot of success in Hollywood. And they made a really bad movie in high school called Embers, but I loved it. I loved the fact that they did it, and I enjoyed watching their bad movie. We didn't intend to set out to make a bad movie, but at the time, too, I had no concept of what it meant to collaborate at all. And of our circle of friends, I was the only one who was diehard into wanting to do this as a career or something full-time. So I took it really seriously. And once it was all said and done, like, the day of the screening, I realized I had a 3-hour movie on my hands because I had just pieced together all of the edited scenes the night before and realized this is too long. And I had to make a VHS tape because that was the only way that the venue we were doing it at NDSU at the time, this was 2003, they only had a VCR. And so I was at Greg Carlson's house, basically editing from one tape to the next, trying to cut out scenes just to make the stupid thing shorter. And while that was happening, that was when I realized, like, this is bad. This isn't good. And there's about 200 people who are going to show up today and watch it. And once the first 10 minutes was passed, you could tell that the audience was realizing what they were in for.
Yeah,
absolutely.
You had to form your expectations because there was this like crawl of music and names in the beginning. You're like, wait.
And that took a solid 10 minutes to get
this is happening, and they're like biblical references. And I remember watching it with Christina, and she's just like all frothing her mouth, like
how delicious it was,
the artistry of it all,
how bad it was.
You know, but that was my biggest takeaway. It normalized the fact that we can do something that big and get it done. Like sure. I was like, oh, right, people do that. Like Tucker was just, he saw Embers and he went and did that, but like I didn't have the same experience watching them. I saw that movie and I was like, why would, like, that was not interesting.
Why would anyone want to do this?
The character you put in Ressl from that movie, as an homage, like it was just terrifying. And, but the huge takeaway I got was, we're like, if I'm an artist, I'm going to make stuff and it's going to be big and I'm going to take risks and I'm probably going to fuck it up, but I'll learn a ton of shit in the process.
Yeah. Like, if you survive failure and you learn what failure feels like and you survive it, you go, oh, okay. I mean, yeah, that was bad. Didn't feel good, but I'm still here the next day. Making that didn't stop me from making anything else in the future, including this podcast. So,
and not to sound cliche, but I think that the thing that has taught me the most as far as an artist over the years has been my failures. You don't learn a lot when everything comes together perfectly and you get accolades and it's exactly what you imagine. I think you learn more when you have something that doesn't turn out exactly the way you want. You can reflect a little bit and be like, oh, I could have put a little more time into this in my planning, or I could have devoted a little bit more of my education to learning how to use these tools I wanted to include. There's nothing that bothers me more than when somebody. You can tell when something is made with love, and when someone gave it the old college try, versus somebody who just wanted to do it and didn't bother to take the time to get into it. And I will always appreciate somebody who creates versus somebody who talks about creating. That's kind of how I feel about it. And we all know people who have sat there and said, "Oh, if only I had a canvas that was this size, I could finally paint what I want." Well, why don't you go out and get that canvas? Well, oh gosh, I can't right now because I'd have to borrow my buddy's truck, and I don't really want to call him right now because last time I talked to him, I made him mad. And you put up all these roadblocks versus somebody who goes out and creates. So even though it was miserable watching Ressl X, and it truly was, I still remember it. In fact, what I remember is how friggin' hot that theater was. It was like 1,000,000 degrees in there because you guys packed it with people who were stoked to see it.
And there was no air conditioning.
And
that as well.
It was like the heater was on.
Yeah.
And I remember there weren't any credits. And as soon as the lights came on, everyone stood up and was like,
let's get out.
Well, I'm sure everyone
Let's
individually felt like I'm sweating a bunch. Everyone can tell I'm sweating a bunch. Is it me? And is it hot in here? No, let's just get the fuck out. So.
Let me ask you, have either of you watched it since then?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, it's great. Each girl I've dated, as they've gotten to know my circle of friends, be like, "Hey, you wanna watch this weird movie?" And they get to see all of them like 10 years younger doing shit that they would.
Whereas I do the opposite. It's just you will never see that.
That's how you break up with a girl?
No,
Hey, I'd like you to check out.
This will make it easier. This will make it easier for you. You can see Ressl X.
Yeah, but if anything, I think it's a movie that should be rewatched with commentary, though, because especially as a time capsule for us in high school, it was huge. A lot of really good memories were made between us as like our friends making it. When I think back about it, I can't think of a single thing that I did right. And I mean that. I cannot think of a single thing that I did in that whole process that I did correctly. I'm pretty sure I messed up every single possible way you can. And I realized it when we were in the Century Theater at NDSU and watching it. And I was like, this is a bad movie. I have 200 people that I've been talking up this movie for almost 2 years, sitting in this audience just going, damn it. Why am I here watching this thing? And so it was incredibly humbling and embarrassing. But I survived it, and it's kind of a scar that I wear with honor now because I learned a lot from that thing. I learned a lot from that.
I mean, being older, like, I have those people in my life that they're idea people, and I'm like, oh, you've got another great idea. I can't wait to hear you write it down. And the thing you did right is you did it. Like you I was like, holy shit, like you made fucking 2.5 hours of all this insanity make sense enough that like I wasn't running out of the theater screaming and stuff. I loved it. I still look back on it because it's this amazing time capsule of that period of our lives and everyone that was involved. I wish it would behoove anyone to have the ability to have something like that from their childhood.
I will also tell you that I have seen professionally made films that have toured around film festivals that I think are bigger crocs than Ressl X because the fun comes out. You can see the fun in it. When you're who'd you dress up as the cow in the middle of the field? Jason Bye. When Jason Bye is in that stupid cow costume, like chewing on grass, people are laughing, and they're laughing for different reasons. Some of them are like, that's a funny image, or some of them are like, look at Jason eating that grass, or
some people are like, I paid $5 to get it. Right. Tickets for $5.
But to me, I've watched films. I remember one from a festival a few years ago that they actually brought like two of the stars in, where I'm watching it going, this is just nonsense. Back-to-back nonsense. I'm not going to mention it on the air, but I'll tell you guys when the mic stopped recording. And I thought to myself, and when I was watching, I was like, they got $500,000 to make this movie, and They got some actual like people with real credits out there, like real television and film credits. I was like, and I would rather be watching Ressl X right now.
I think the biggest takeaway though from making that movie for me was that to make a good movie or to make a good piece of media in the vein of that, it is a collaborative art. And when you see a good movie, you're seeing the result of a successful collaboration. And sometimes those collaborations are acrimonious, like they're not friendly. I think of
absolutely.
Blade Runner, right? The very famous movie. The crew hated Ridley Scott, absolutely hated him. They were all still collaborating, even though it was contentious, but their collaboration was fruitful. It was successful. You'll hear a lot of people talk about auteur theory, the idea that a film mostly flows from one person with a singular vision. And while you do need an anchor and a vision, it's not like painting a picture where you have an image in your head and you sit down in front of a canvas and you do your best to recreate the image. You have no chance of recreating exactly what you see in your head, and you can't do it yourself. It's not possible, nor should you want to. It is so much more fun and enjoyable to make a movie or a play or a TV show or a podcast as a collaboration than as someone who's just writing their novel, where it's just flowing from you. So making those things good is the art of learning how to collaborate successfully. That's the biggest takeaway I took from that, because I was not collaborating. I was very specific. Some of us, like Ressl and a few other guys, really wanted to collaborate, and they did a little bit, but I kind of held them at arm's length because I was this teenager who was full of himself, who wanted to be a big-time director.
This is my shot, you guys.
This is how this works. I'm in charge of this. Of course, we were all teenage boys, so a lot of the guys just were dinking around.
Well, early on, there was an example of someone not showing up and not doing their part, and it halting production, right? Like they're wasting everyone's time, and they literally have to be edited out of the movie.
But my solution to that wasn't to edit him out of the movie.
But it was even more like it was. I remember it happening in your solution and seeing the giant glowing blob over his head and thinking, this is the greatest thing. Like, yeah. I couldn't imagine a more hilarious.
Yeah, we had a cast member who just he's a great guy. He was a friend of ours, but he just wasn't that committed to it. He had other priorities.
Yeah,
and we were trying to film it over a summer, and we'd spent a month shooting stuff. And yeah, he wasn't showing up. It was kind of contentious, so I cut him from the movie. But we'd been shooting for a month, and we had all these scenes, and it was already hell trying to get those things done. And my brilliant solution was his character was already established as being a robot, so let's make him a robot with a glowing white sphere for a head that I'll just Photoshop in rotoscope style. And so we had like 3 or 4 different people play that character throughout the movie, because I thought I'll just cover his head with this glowing thing and we'll subtitle all of his phrasing. And I should have just restarted from the beginning.
Was it a dial-up tone? Was that like his voice?
Yeah.
And then you subtitled?
It was all sorts of beeps and boops that I didn't know how to audio mix correctly. So when we're playing it in the theater, people are like covering their ears every time that character talks because it was
not balanced well.
It was not balanced. It was screeching up and breaking speakers, and
I don't know. I accepted it so easily, and it's this weird indispensable part of it to me now that I wouldn't feel the same with just normal, because it's this mark on the film, like, oh, this didn't go as planned, but that thing is like, what is that?
That should be the subtitle to the film, Ressl X. Well, this didn't go as planned.
Right.
That's all. Any new marketing.
A couple years went by, haircuts
when we re-release it.
Yeah.
Well, to me, that is just the exact conversation we're having. It's what do you take in, and I have respect for people who create art, even if it's not something that I personally care for. And I'm the first person to admit there's a lot of times when I have to lean over and say, "What are they trying to say here? I don't get it."
Certainly I'm going to take the opportunity here to maybe steer the conversation away from Ressl X for a little bit, but we can certainly. I'm an open book on that, so we can certainly talk about as much as you want.
For a game.
Ressl, I'm interested to hear you talk about some of your own attempts at making interactive art, because you've done some stuff like around town here in Fargo specifically that I thought was really, really interesting. Could you talk about some of that?
Yeah. So immediately following So like my forays into Jejune, I could tell this sort of seed was planted into my head. Like, what do I want? I knew it needed to come from me. Like there need to, if I'm going to do it, it's going to pretty much just be me. There's not a lot of people that I know that go to San Francisco and had experience of this thing, and there were a few examples of it. I could describe it to people, but like even at this point, it's hard to describe what that thing is. It's like, hey, do you have an hour and a half to sit down and watch this movie to see this one example of this thing that worked? There's sort of this graveyard of other things that didn't work as well. Or there were different versions of it, more or less interactive in different cities. But I knew I wanted something like that that took Fargo and it shined light on the things that were cool about it, and it was free and automated, so I didn't have to be there holding people's hands, and they could just walk into it. Like it just happened, like, oh, what's that flyer or that thing? And then they call the number and it leads them to this phone, and there's a story behind it that leads them through town and stuff like that. So I try to do that. I started with a robot. I was like, I realized I just want a giant robot costume, and I can make that the character and include that in this weird way. And so I did that, and I had no idea what the actual story was or how I was going to include it, but I did that. And there's like a synopsis of it. I did sort of a postmortem and explanation of everything, collected all the materials because they don't exist out there anymore. You can't. It takes a lot of work to maintain stuff like that. That's just out there in the physical world, especially when it's dispersed across businesses or places. But anyone can go see that. It's on my website. And then
what's the website? Just put it out there.
Right, MikeRessl.com. So
spell it out.
Mike REZL.com. So, and that's called the Transtemporal Detective Agency. So, I'm into some esoteric fringe stuff, and so I kind of took this really literal detective story of this trans-dimensional agency where you're looking for this robot who went missing, and there's this science fiction-y surrealist aspect to it. But you discover all these things. I would approach these businesses and say, hey, can I put this giant like robot in your basement? And I would be really nervous, but I would realize immediately people were like, yeah, sure. Like, because I wasn't asking for anything. And I felt if this is successful at all, it's just going to bring more people in there. And if people do see it, they'll interact with something that they wouldn't interact with normally. And so it's this kind of piece of art that's just dispersed randomly if you're just happening upon it. But I advertise with flyers that I would, just like the Jejune Institute, describe in completely different ways as completely different things. And the only I had people fill out a form, like you were joining an agency, because I had to have some metric for like who the hell are these people that are actually going to do this. And I would ask them really personal questions to make it weird. And so I got some litmus for like the people that were interested in it, but I think because it's quite a while ago when I did this, it's still a little too esoteric. It's just a little too, just there were too many syllables in the name. So we're trying to put like in a really general sense, like it was too complicated. And the people that I had collaborate with, like I approached, like I found a street artist. It's like one of the first things I did is like I'm just going to walk up and down Fargo at night and see like what else is there that I'm not aware of. I found. There was all this graffiti everywhere, and I noticed there was a consistency. It was a guy he was tagging everything, but with like really intentional pieces art. Like there's still 3 or 4 pieces that he's done that look like they're really intentional images. They're not just his name, in funny letters. Mm-hmm. Like there's an image of a wolf or like a person, and in really strategic places. They're still there. They've been there for a decade, like 10 years now. And so he had a blog, anonymous blog, and I tracked him down, and I could tell he was really skittish. Like he thought I was gonna, because he said he had his running shoes on, because he was worried that someone was eventually gonna try to arrest him for all the stuff that he was putting up. And I wasn't that guy. I was like, no, I want to do this weird thing with this robot. Will you help me? And once he figured that out, he was like, yeah, okay. But it was more like, what do you want me to do? Because I was still having trouble explaining what the hell this thing is. I didn't even know what I wanted to do. I was just like, I want public art. I want it to be interactive. Read this stuff, make these things. And he did. So he worked at a sign shop in Fargo and helped me sandblast and fabricate a bunch of stuff. And it kind of came together. So I kind of got my feet wet, I guess, doing that. And then I have another project I've been working on for the last 5 years, but it's not ready yet. Like I can't show enough of it yet to say, here's a good example of where I'm at now. But same vein, similar characters. I want it to be more accessible. I still want it to be free and open to the general public, like accessible and have an automated aspect, but I also wanted to have something where there's a space that I have control over, where I can engineer part of the experience. Like you can have something more intentional. You can actually interact with like a character that their real person is behind. And I actually just hired a writer about 6 months ago because I reached a point. 4 years is a long time to work on anything. I've kind of been in a vacuum. I was like, I'm going crazy, and this thing needs to happen at some point. And I did. I just posted online. I found a guy who actually wrote. He's written for some Bethesda games and like done really big stuff. And I was impressed he was willing to do it. And I got some really good ideas and feedback and stuff like that. So I've been kind of picking that apart and trying to decide like what this thing is and what it's going to look like. So it's a real process. Like I definitely, I've tried to take that sense of collaboration to heart because, what Tucker said earlier, like absolutely applies. At the same time, I feel like I'm doing this thing that I don't really have. Like it takes enough for me just to explain it. I realize like, okay, I need to pay someone to read the treatise that I've put together. Like here's a 5-page overview of everything that I've made. And here, I've already made a bunch of shit. Can we use some of that? Because that'd be great. So I don't waste all of this work that I put into it. Because when it's not like something that's purely digital or a film, where like when you're editing out scenes, you can still include those later. Like when I physically make something that I can't include later, I've invested all this time. It's very like it's technically just I've learned something. That's all I can take from it, and no one will ever see that part of it. So I have over time accumulated enough stuff for it. It's like this weird robot that's trying to learn to walk because you're trying to figure out what you can get to make it move forward into something that has a cohesive enough of a narrative that isn't creepy and that is fun enough that people can immediately recognize as something that is fun, not threatening, and that they would be interested enough into like actively interact with. Because I think the real hurdle is that the generic entertainment experience is like you go stand in line and you buy a ticket and you sit in a chair and you take something and light gets shoved in your eyes, and that's not an active. You're not forced to make decisions or take risks, no matter how small they are, to have the opportunity for this other type of experience where you're involved in it. So,
have you seen the documentary on Wayne White? Wayne White is the guy who I think he's done a lot of stuff, but most famously, he designed all the stuff that's in Pee-wee's Playhouse. So, like, he did the design for Cherry and stuff like that.
Really?
It's Scotch, Noel Anderson, who's also been a guest on this show, told me about it years ago. And here's a guy who's creating things that people said, well, you can never do that. Puppets that are 2 stories tall and just weird stuff. And he said, well, there's no such thing as can't when it comes to art. And it comes to what your idea is. You might have to scale back certain aspects of it if you're not willing to go whole hog into it. But if you can dream it, there's a way to accomplish it in some way. And so it's interesting to me. Earlier in the podcast, Tucker was talking about the fact that he wouldn't relinquish any of the control because he wanted to be the director, and he learned that lesson young and early on. So good for him. But you're talking about making this a collaboration, and I imagine that they get excited, like your writer when they were like going through that, and all of a sudden like, hey man, this is going to be cool. This is going to be awesome.
I did.
And now they get to be a part of that process.
I did. I had one really talented writer. I think there's this type of writer that will treat every correspondence with you like it's a fun interaction, right? And I had one of those, and I thought, like, this guy's it. I have to track this guy down. And one of the things he said was like, it seems like you give a shit. That's why he was so excited to do it. And it didn't work out because he got a full-time job doing some other stuff. But I think if you're really putting forth that time and effort, you can get that. I did. I when I initially pitched it, I had done enough work. I actually got a small grant from someone in town for like $200. But I was practicing initially, you have to like formulate that intentionality, and I wanted a total stranger to just validate the fact, like, I'm not crazy, right? Like, if I want to try to do this thing, like, I don't really know how it's going to work, but these are the pieces that I want to put together. It goes a long way.
Mike, it has been great having you on the show again. I hope you'll come back again soon. And your website, Mike Ressl, REZL.com. You can go and check out all sorts of projects that you've been working on. And who knows, maybe sometime some will end up in a basement looking at a robot
Yep,
that
near
you've
you.
created.
Yep.
I'm excited about that. Well, again, thanks for being on the show.
Awesome. Thank you. It was great talking to you guys.
That's going to wrap it up for today's show. For more info, including how you can help us keep the lights on by donating to our Patreon, visit our website, www.jjmeetsworld.com, or hit us up on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all the sites the kids are using these days. If you'd like to stay up to date on new episodes of JJ Meets World, don't forget to subscribe to us on iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, or wherever you consume those podcasts that you love. JJ Meets World is produced every week by Tucker Lucas. You can find out more about Tucker's work by checking out www.moonbasemaria.com. JJ's on Facebook, but I don't want to friend you, so go to linebenders.com and contact me there, www.linebenders.com. We're going to end this one by taking some questions that have been emailed into the studio. Question number 1 is, do you do these naked or are you wearing clothes? Well, we're wearing clothes, but not the kind that you'd imagine. Question number 2, when will I get a refund for my stainless steel? Nope, this is from one of my Amazon seller accounts. Hold on. I guess we had one question, so there we go. We answered it.